Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I'm here checking out Racing Lagoon. This is another one of those quote-unquote cult classics that have been around on the PlayStation 1, stuck in Japan for a really long time, but they've put out a fan translation. By they, I mean like one translator, who has been, oddly enough, putting out a new version of this translation patch every chapter of the game that he does, and by every chapter I mean every night, because that's how this game separates its chapters, quote-unquote. It's an unusual release strategy, but it's one that I appreciate, because I just waited for the game to be a fair few chapters in. I believe this is night 7, this version of the patch that you're seeing on screen right now, although you're only seeing gameplay from night 3, because that's about as far as I got. There are multiple really weird problems with this game, and after all of the stuff I heard about it on, gaming websites, on forums, on communities that always said it was one of those imports that was worth owning, I always expected this to be like a really good game that just never got localized for some reason. But then I actually ended up looking up the review scores from Japan out of curiosity, and it did not review well at all. It kind of got slandered across the board. Like a 5 out of 10, a 4 out of 10, a 6 out of 10, roughly. Doesn't sound like much if you're familiar with Japan, but it is still pretty bad even for them. So, man, it's surprising. But yes, I have played this for 3 nights, so 3 chapters, and I have a fair few problems with it. But I'll start with the positives that I have about it. It's a car PG, and it is truest in the truest of senses. Like, it's not like Road Trip Adventure where you run around doing quests for people, getting into races, but only the really RPG-esque thing is you're upgrading your parts from time to time. No, this game's got a proper overworld. You walk around with quote-unquote random encounters and everything. It feels more like an RPG than it does a car game sometimes. And mostly it does this well enough. You've got little random encounters that you do where it's just like 50-second to a minute-ish races where you try and beat these random encounters and you get to take a part from them. And then you will go around stopping at these places, viewing cutscenes, reading the story, and doing races at the end of them, which will let you move on. And there are some other things around the outside, like some optional races, a bank that'll let you invest your rating points that you can use to double or triple or even quintuple them as you go on through the story. And that all works mostly as expected, especially the car RPG stuff, because there is a legitimate sense of powering up your car, different parts doing different things, getting your car to be lighter or heavier, changing the type of car that you drive, things along those lines. They all work about how as you would expect, and they do make a significant difference to the car, and I will give them thumbs up for that. And the driving system, while a little bit fiddly, actually does work pretty well. It is pretty satisfying to get these cars around the corners. The one big hint I'll give you about this game's driving system: never use the brake if you can avoid it. Learn how to use the handbrake to do drifting turns, because that seems to be the only way that you can reasonably expect to win, especially early on. And I will give it credit for this. This is one of the better looking games on the PlayStation 1 that I've seen, especially when you're in the overworld and it does these panning shots to show you the entirety of Yokohama. It's a really well done example of a world map, so to say, and the racing areas actually look pretty good too, with landmarks being visible off in the distance, just the ways that the environments are detailed, the ways the cars are detailed, and the fact that you can do things like add wings and change your paint color, and it all works just relatively well. It's no Gran Turismo, but it's still doing pretty well for itself. With that said, the rest of the game kind of falls apart. It really does. So, the way that this game works is that in any race that you do, including the first race that you get into, if you win, you get to take a part from the opponent. There's also things like leveling up your engine, your chassis, and your body in order to add more add-ons to them. And you also get rating points, which will I think it's called rating points, it might be something else, but you use these points in order to steal parts off of other cars. So you'll be able to steal things like mufflers and drivetrains and even chassis, engines, and bodies if you want, and slowly upgrade your car over the course of time. But if you lose any race, you will lose a part at random that's equipped to your car. Now, if you suck at this game, this will be an absolutely crippling nightmare for you. Even the Game FAQs guide for this game, which coincidentally enough was actually written by the site's founder, CJC, says that you should spend enough time in the two-player battle mode against the AI until you can get down to a certain time on a certain course, because if you don't, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble. And to be fair, he's bloody right. But for people who just want to drop in and experience the story and get into a car PG, the fact that you can lose parts means that a lot of the game can feel like it's absolutely crippling. Because if you lose like 3 races in a row, you've just lost an absolute ton of progress. And it doesn't help that the loading times between them and the loading times to do things like go and save are really long. So you might end up doing 2 random battles, going back and saving, and this is like 5 minutes. And it's 5 minutes that feels way longer than that. It genuinely feels like a grind, trying to get enough parts so that if you do end up needing to do an important race, it means that you'll at least have some backup parts so that your cars aren't complete garbage. But the problem is that the encounters on the world map, now they aren't completely random, they do come in from the edges of the screen. You do get some warning. However, sometimes it can be obscured by the world map. Sometimes there'll be someone coming from the opposite direction, you'll be halfway through a turn and there'll be no way for you to avoid it. And even then, sometimes when you get into the random encounter itself, it'll be a car that's just way better than yours. Just straight up, and you won't be able to do anything about it. So you'll be stuck in a race that you have absolutely no chance of winning, and you'll end up losing a part, and then you'll have to either reload a save, or you'll have to try and win another race, which might be another completely random, overpowered car that you won't be able to do anything about, and you'll get to repeat the cycle. There are ways around this problem. As I said, going and saving every time you win a random battle is entirely possible, but also entirely painful, just because of how long it takes to load between screens, how long it takes to change out your parts, how long it takes to go and save, just because the frame rate can dip out. The loading times between races is like 10 seconds going in and going out. There is another way around this though, and I find this to be thematically really weird, really freaking weird. If you drive on the right side of the road, you won't run into random encounters as much, because they'll have less time to come up on you if you're not directly in their path, because thankfully they don't break the road rules to chase you down. And if they come up from behind you, they will be faster than you, but it'll give you time to find a turn and turn off. They still might decide to follow you, but it's still better than nothing. As I said, you still might have the chance of one coming at you from behind a building and you'll never see them coming. You might end up in a position where you simply can't get out of the way because you're turning too slow, or you need to reverse to get out of a dead end or what have you. And of course, you've got races that you can't lose. They're story-based races, but frankly, they're less punishing because they just give you an option to retry, which will put you right back outside the race. I haven't checked if you actually lose any parts from that, but those races can also be really awkward. Example, the race at the end of Chapter 2. If you aren't ahead of the opponent by a specific point in the race, which is the halfway point, the game will automatically game over you and you'll have no idea why until you actually see the story event that happens. It's bizarre. It's so bloody bizarre. I don't understand it. It's genuinely weird. It makes sense afterwards, but when you're in the moment and you're thinking, oh, I've got X amount of distance left in order to actually overtake and get ahead of this guy, I can pull it off, and then the game's just like, fuck you, you lose. It's just bizarre, especially for the story event that happens. You don't really need to be in front for the story event that happens to make sense, but we'll get to that. And the rest of the game is just wandering around this open world and going in and trying to, like, watch these cutscenes and trying to find where you need to go. And the world is pretty big. You're going to be constantly stopped or at least detoured by random encounters. And you're never entirely let me try this again. For a lot of the time, you're not entirely sure where you need to go. Because there's a lot of locations to go to, and sometimes they can give you the wrong names. So you might be wandering around trying to figure out where the bloody hell you need to go. Sometimes it's obvious. There'll be like a lot of cars parked outside a location. You'll be able to pull up, park, and be like, hey, is this the right place I need to go? And sometimes that works, but sometimes it doesn't. So that's kind of annoying. What's also kind of annoying is that the cutscenes tend to swap between the text automatically going through and the text not automatically going through. And it can be kind of hard to tell the difference. So you might be sitting there for 30 seconds thinking, do they want me to press the circle button? Yeah, they probably want me to press the circle button here. So it's kind of annoying to watch the story. Now, I'll get onto the presentation. It's got a good soundtrack. It fits the theme perfectly. As I said, did I say that in this take? I'll say it again. It is a good looking game. The overworld does look good, and when they do their panning shots, the overworld does really add to the atmosphere. And when you're actually in the race, being able to change things like your car's color, the accessories on it, the actual environments themselves really do look good. But when you get to the 2D stuff, it's Square Enix. You'd think they would be able to do better. The pre-rendered backgrounds look okay. I don't have a problem with the pre-rendered backgrounds, but the two-dimensional sprites they've got, which have clearly been converted from 3D models, just look ugly as sin, and they always have them doing these, like, little canned animations, which just don't look right. They look awful. I don't know what's going on with them, but that's just what happens. And it really doesn't add to the fact that this game really feels like it's up itself. The biggest problem I have with this game is the story and the writing. And I don't know if I can blame this on the fan translator. I don't know if I can blame this on the original, like, script that he had to work with and he was just being faithful. But my god, this game feels like it's up itself sometimes with the way that the writing comes out, with the way that they try and present certain things. It feels like a 17-year-old playing around with a video editor sometimes. The set of cutscenes that you get at the end of Chapter 2, before and after the final race, is just so bizarre that it makes me think of a child playing around with a video editor and writing a script. It's so, like, it's trying to feel deep and trying to portray these characters with emotional depth, but they all come off so one-dimensional that it's kind of hilarious. And the writing just does, it's so stupid. I have intentionally put the cutscenes at the end of Chapter 2 at the end of this gameplay. You'll see them around the 32-minute mark if you are watching this just linearly. But my god, it's so bad. I was cackling at how just seemingly deep it was trying to be, while the camera had this sort of water splashy effect, and it was zooming in and out of this guy's body laying on the screen. And then there was this explosion that came out of nowhere. It was literally nothing. Like, I remember watching this episode of Red Letter Media where they were talking about this absolutely awful experimental horror film called The Jar. And even Jay Bowman thought it was a bit up itself, and this is the same sort of vibe that I get off this game and what it tries to do with its story and dialogue. And it's hilarious. For me personally, it's hilarious. The two-dimensional sprites doing their canned animations, the really unusual choices of what they decide to do with the presentation of the story. And they put it next to these, like, 3D rendered things of, like, cars racing around and what have you. I intentionally left the intro of this game in the beginning because I wanted you to see some of that. And it gives me these real Initial D vibes. But Initial D in the in like a positive sense, like I see that and I think this is giving me some positive Initial D vibes. But then everything else just kind of goes down the toilet. I don't know. I feel like this would be a great game for like a Retsa Prey, you know, just one where they sit around mocking this game and its awful story. And, like, that's pretty much all I've got to say about it. Like, the writing is quite shallow. The characters aren't interesting. Some of them are quite stereotypical. He doesn't seem to have slipped too much in the way of, like, modern slang in. Not too much, anyway. But it really is just bad. Like, there just doesn't seem to be anything worth salvaging within the first 3 chapters. So, I don't know. This might be just me, but I invite you to have a look at the cutscenes at the end of this video and judge for yourself. It's also worth noting that there are some things that didn't end up being translated as part of the fan translation. Like, there are certain things where the grammar and the punctuation are just way off, and I'm assuming those were, like, originally in English and he didn't touch them, which I understand. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't make the entire game's fan translation feel a little bit more amateurish. But again, I understand. There are some things that you just can't touch if you're doing this by yourself. With that said though, I'm going to leave you to watch the rest of this gameplay. You might notice at certain points in the gameplay past this point that the gameplay will suddenly jump backwards a few seconds because that was me having legitimately given up because it was at the point where I was worried that if I was losing any parts whatsoever, I was going to have to, like, go on a grinding spree to get them back. And I just couldn't have it. And especially when the one, like, bank thing that lets you put your racing points that you win as part of the actual races into investments, and the only one that's actually worth doing is the one that's like, hey, if you keep your win rate above X amount, you will get a higher return on investment. So at this point, I had just kind of given up, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to use the rewind function on this emulator, and I'm going to abuse the fuck out of it to make sure I don't lose any races. And you might call that cheating, and to be fair, I call that cheating as well, but I feel like when the game has actively driven me to this point, when I came in with a legitimately open mind, and I actually tried, like, playing through the game, and I got to the end of Chapter 2, but I'd lost, like, half the parts that I earned, that I was like, you know what, screw it, I'm doing this again, and I practiced, and I did decently well for myself, but the game is just so punishing that one mistake is usually enough to lose you any particular race, and that means you'll end up losing a part off of it. So that's why those jumps are there. It had just been me giving up on, like, doing this fairly, quote-unquote. So, yeah, that's why that's there. Final opinions on Racing Lagoon. It's not very good. The fan translation is alright. The car RPG stuff is actually relatively well done. But the difficulty is really punishing. The overall way the parts work can be quite unsatisfying when you have to deal with the fact that you're constantly losing parts. The way that the game's story is presented is incredibly laughable to the point where I can't take it seriously. And as a result, I can't recommend it. I can't recommend you go and seek this one out. This has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.